Questions were pretty easy, very easy. They were treating him gently. Got me thinking again about Barack Obama, his former boss, huh? You know, we're still living with a lot of, his legacy. Some of the stuff he did still affecting all of us. Makes sense, two-term president. One thing he did, he was reluctant to ever use the phrase Islamic terrorism. Didn't say it, wouldn't say it. Some thought he was in denial that it actually existed. And that's relevant right now. Now, we've had two horrible shootings in recent weeks. We had Boulder this week. 10 victims. An alleged shooter in custody right now. Notice the 10 victims are all believed to be Caucasian. Now, let's go through a little bit about what we know of the shooter, okay? From his online activity, it's pretty clear he's a Trump hater and he perceived Islamic persecution. It is believed that he's Muslim and originally from Syria. All right, now let's talk about the Atlanta shooting last week. We had 8 victims, 6 of them Asian women, a white woman, a white man, and a Hispanic man was shot and injured. Okay, let's put those now side by side, Atlanta and Boulder. Now, which one do you think the mainstream media are calling a hate crime? Yep, Atlanta. Even though the suspect in custody is saying he had a sex addiction, they're all dismissing that. Law enforcement is saying there's no indication of a hate crime. Media wants to hear none of that, and they certainly don't want to hear hate crime regarding Boulder. Listen to this.
When I was watching that news conference and he called it a bad day, and all I could think of was 8 people are grieving tonight. It's a guy that had an issue. He blames a race of people for his problem. And then he goes and eliminates what he thinks to eliminate the temptation that he has an issue with. It's outrageous.
It's a peculiar amount of empathy for a mass shooter.
It's humanizing the shooter. Yeah. It's humanizing the shooter once again.
Yeah.
And can I point out that the shooter is a white man who is alive after they knew that he'd killed 8 people.
And he was armed.
And he was armed, and they knew that too.
Yeah.
Yale seemed to be upset that they didn't blow the shooter away when they didn't have to. All right, you've seen this before. It's all Trump's fault. It's his rhetoric that set the conditions for hate crimes in America. And remember, no one's saying officially that what happened in Boulder is a hate crime. It's all about Atlanta. Look at this. And again, they say it's all traced back to Trump.
Anti-immigrant rhetoric, racist rhetoric has been a hallmark and feature of his campaign, of his presidency.
We have talked about the inflammatory rhetoric from President Trump since day one of his campaign.
Why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus? Why do you keep using this? A lot of people say it's racist.
It's not racist at all, no, not at all. It comes from China. That's why.
Words matter. Calling it that presents physical harm to the Asian American community.
This rhetoric of hate and division leaves no room for voters who see themselves as decent people.
You use the term Kung Flu. My question is, do you think that's wrong, Kung Flu? And do you think using the term Chinese virus, that puts Asian Americans at risk, that people might target them?
Lindsey Graham downplaying the former president's racist rhetoric, the kind of hate that has Asian Americans across this country terrified that they'll be victims of the next explosion of violence.
So I asked some folks, and we all worked on this together. Let's find the worst rhetoric, all this hateful rhetoric that President Trump allegedly used against Asians. Where is this controversial stuff that they're all talking about? This is what we found. Is this what fueled Atlanta? You tell me.
I would like to begin by announcing some important developments in our war against the Chinese virus.
That name gets further and further away from China as opposed to calling it the Chinese virus.
Once again engaged in a great global struggle. We have waged a fierce battle against the invisible enemy, the China virus.
Okay, the China virus. I've called it the China virus. It originated in China. And you know what? Traditionally, that's what we call some of these horrible viruses. Okay, the Ebola virus came from the Ebola River in the Congo. That's how it got its name. Let's take a look at the Zika virus, the Zika forest in Uganda. I didn't know there was a forest, but there is. Next, please. MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. I've heard of MERS. I didn't know it stood for the Middle East, but it does. Next, please. The West Nile virus. West Nile, Uganda, a region in Uganda. Let's see. Spanish flu. I think that's Spain. Oh, and here's one. Lyme disease. Did you know that there's a Lyme, Connecticut, and that's where the disease originated? Happens all the time, and scientific papers actually use these terms. Let's take a look. MERS, I think there's a CDC guidebook that talks all about the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. Now, there is the one time that he made a bit of a, well, is it a joke or what? But we'll play it for you. He said it at a rally. Hit it.
By the way, it's a disease, without question, has more names than any disease in history. I can name Kung Flu. I can name 19 different versions of names.
Okay, he said Kung Flu. Now, do we think that set off the murderous rampage in Atlanta? Is that a reasonable connection to make? Law enforcement are not making that connection. The shooter is saying that he had a horrible, horrible problem with sex addiction. Now let's switch to Boulder. Again, all of the victims in this case are Caucasian, the shooter originally from Syria. Now, I'm wondering for a moment, we've heard so much. Enforcement are not making that connection. The shooter is saying that he had a horrible, horrible problem with sex addiction. Now let's switch to Boulder. Again, all of the victims in this case are Caucasian, the shooter originally from Syria. Now, I'm wondering for a moment, we've heard so much in this country about white supremacy, right? It is the #1 threat. Is law enforcement looking that perhaps this was in reaction to that? He may have been fueled by the white supremacy rhetoric that's out there, that it's a danger and he wanted to stop it. I mean, listen to some of this.
Racism is real in America.
That is tonight's lesson in white privilege. White America needs to come to terms with the fact that we live in a racist society.
All I kept thinking about over the past few weeks was just how lucky I am as a white privileged person.
The fact of the matter is there is institutional racism in America.
Everyone black I know feels hunted.
This is white privilege on steroids.
The threat of white supremacy looms large.
What a great danger white supremacy holds.
White supremacists, bigger threat inside this country than ISIS, Al-Qaeda, anyone else.
Wow. So could a deranged person possibly get it in their head that white people are a real threat? Take a look. In Boulder, all of the victims were Caucasian. Unlike in Atlanta, where there was some Caucasian and mostly Asian, all were Caucasian. I think that's interesting, and no one is talking about it. Huh. Why do you think that is? Now let's put them both up, side by side. We have Atlanta. Everyone is trying to say, insist, is a hate crime, yet there seems to be no evidence of that from law enforcement and the shooter himself, the alleged shooter, saying he was motivated by other reasons. He's deranged. The guy on the right, the alleged shooter, he's also deranged, but we also have some circumstantial evidence that indicates that he may have had a radical Islamic agenda, okay? It's quite clear. But nobody wants to talk about that in the mainstream media. As recently as yesterday, they were right back to talking about January 6th. January 6th. And all the folks who fueled that. Donald Trump, right-leaning media, right? All responsible. Doesn't work that way. We've got to be very, very careful, though, about what we say now. You've heard about this. People are afraid of being canceled, afraid of being deplatformed. We started on Barack Obama. I want to go back to Barack Obama, back when he was trying to impress us, back when he wanted us to like